Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Friends, a few brief announcements, and then we will get to our preview, which will be part 2 of Vince Garcia's interview with Matt Ward. But before I do, some of you may be wondering, what happened to the sidekick? Where's Linda? Well, I can tell you, Linda and Joel are packing the car. This is Pack the Car Day. And tomorrow they take their daughter off to the University of Chicago to enroll. So they'll probably be listening to this driving. And that's a good segue into something I want to announce. I've asked Linda to kind of chronicle all the things that she did, her and her husband, Joel, from the time Sam made the decision to commit to the University of Chicago, all the way up through the end of the first quarter. So the University of Chicago is on the quarter system, which is also one reason why they're starting a little later than some schools start. And she's actually going to do an interview, part of our extended series on not only being concerned with admissions to college, but success in college. And so Lisa can interview Linda and talk about all the things she learned, all the things she did to prepare. And I think that should be a really good interview. And so that's one we can look for in a few months. Let's get through the first quarter first before we go there. A couple other announcements. I know some of you may be wondering, whoa, are you going to talk about what's going on with the University of Columbia? I mean, that's deep. And I went back and forth. Do I do a little 5, 7, 8, 9-minute blurb on it here? But Dave's been on fire. He's been sending me these incredible articles on Columbia, and their fall from grace, if you want to put it that way, in the rankings. And so what Dave and I are going to do actually is give you a double in the news on 261. So we've got a really, really hot topic for that day that we're excited to talk to you about, but we are going to really also plunge into what's going on with Columbia. But I want to just give you a bit of a blurb, a little preview. They call it a tease. So this is a quote from an article Dave and I will be discussing. This is from Michael Thaddeus, the math professor who blew the whistle on Columbia. And it's an article that appeared in The Guardian. And this is a quote from Thaddeus. "I've long believed that all university rankings are essentially worthless. They're based on data that have very little to do with academic merit of an institution." And then check this out. "And that data might not even be accurate in the first place." So that's just a little bit, he's pulling no punches, and we'll be talking about that. Okay. So where will I be for most of this week? I will be in Houston with thousands of other college admission officers and college admission counselors. So NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counseling, they have a huge annual gathering for instruction, interaction, networking, professional development. And I don't know what the numbers will be this year because who knows if there's still any lingering effects from the pandemic. But it is not uncommon for that NACAC annual gathering to see numbers closer to 10,000 than 5,000. So it's huge. Now, why am I mentioning it? Because we know a lot of college counselors listen. And I have to thank Susan for this. She's been saying to me for some time, Mark, we should get together at NACAC. Let's get together at NACAC. And I plan on coming on here with the schedule and giving you an exact time when we could meet at NACAC. and say if you're a college counselor and you're listening, you're going to be at NACAC in Houston, join us. But the website's down. So what I'm going to say is text me. I have no problem putting my number out there. It's 404-664-4340, 404-664-4340. If you are a college counselor, you're going to NACAC, Susan and I and some others on our team will be there, and we would love to meet you. And I was just going to put this out just to our college counselors confab, our group of college counselors who meet twice a year. But why not the more the merrier? So if you're a podcast listener, you're going to be at NACAC, you want an opportunity to meet, shoot me a text, 404-664-4340. And by then we will have details. Hopefully the website's back up. Can tell you a time and place when we can meet. They have these opportunities to gather when the exhibits are going on. There's a lot of free food out there. It's a little break in the action. You won't have to miss any of the conference sessions. Nothing sort of fires me up more than meeting podcast listeners. And so Susan and I would love to be able to do that. I know Sylvia will be there and some others as well. So we'll look forward to that.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, hopefully you heard the first part of Vince Garcia's interview with Matt Ward about Cal Lutheran University. And I just want to give you a little bit of a preview of the final part of that interview. So in part 2, Matt talks about the outstanding program they have called 4 to Finish. And they offer this to all of their students. What is 4 to Finish? Matt explains it. He also talks about the diversity at CLU and how it's changed in the last 15 years. Then he's really transparent about the challenges CLU faced during a really difficult time. And some multiple things hit the school at once. And I also have to give Vince credit for asking there and going there, because do a good interview, you have to ask the tough stuff. And Vince asked the tough questions, and Matt gave a straight answer. Then Matt talks about the professional sports teams that UCLU for their actual training and the internship opportunities that opens up for that students. He talks about the sports management program at CLU and how it's taking off. And of course, Vince puts Matt on the hot seat in our lightning round. And then if you think that's it, no, Matt Ever, the teacher, he had to get another great opportunity. And he does talk about some of the things that are happening within higher ed that he believes are going to continue to disrupt admissions, not just at CLU, but nationwide. Listen and enjoy.
There's another program too that I think it may have started after I was there, 4 to Finish, graduation guarantee. Talk about what that, how that got started, and what impact has it had on the campus and your work.
Yeah, so the 4 to Finish program is basically a guarantee that you will graduate in 4 years, or you don't pay tuition after that. And this is an asset that we knew already existed. I mean, it allows us to position ourselves against public institutions where students, really have to struggle to get their courses on time and take a lot of time to graduate. And they're, so we're matching price, but then we're also guaranteeing that in terms of the economics of education and the opportunity cost of being in school or graduating and getting a job or going on to a master's or PhD program or whatever, that we're able to deliver on that as well, that students will graduate in 4 years. There's a little bit of fine print, but not a lot. I mean, basically, we ask that students, pick their academic major by their sophomore year. They can't, waffle between, 4 different majors over a couple of years. They have to get, attend their advising appointment. So it's a way for us to hold students accountable. It also has really, transformed our 4-year graduation rate, over time. So student, and like if you look at Cal Lutheran and you compare us to some of the most selective schools where the students are just going to be better able to graduate in 4 years, we're definitely fighting above our weight class. So this brings me a lot of fulfillment to know that we're bringing in, a more diverse class, maybe not as high achieving as some of the most selective schools in our region, but we're graduating them at a rate that is either similarly or faster. So getting students to the finish line and changing the trajectory of their lives through these kinds of programs is what it's all about. So
That's
for to
great.
finish is part of that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Like I said at the beginning, my niece just graduated, and I hadn't been on campus for a number. Well, I mean, actually, her freshman year I was there, and for my business for Q&A, we shot some student shots around campus. I should send them to you because you can throw them into your view book. And they were super diverse. And in fact, from that group, I think there were probably 10 students. I think that 9 graduate of the 10, which I thought was like astonishing. But the thing that was most astonishing, because I worked with diversity recruitment when I was at CLU, I mean, I've been to a lot of graduations, college graduations, and I literally had not seen a campus transformed student-wise so quickly, with the exception of Occidental. But even Occidental, has sort of slowed that down a bit. But talk about the diversity of CLU and how you got there and what it took to get the campus there.
Yeah. So for me, it's part of who I am professionally to, and one of the reasons I got into admission and this work and the financial aid work is to create access, to create opportunities, to kind of dismantle old language, like primarily white institutions, and transforming these institutions into something new that lives into a mission of social justice. And so for me, the nice thing about being in my role is I can play a social engineering role. And do it at a place like Cal Lutheran has been great because it fits with our mission. And the word justice in our mission is taken seriously, but also this idea of service to neighbor is part of our personality and who we are. So as we look at the demographics of the state of California, and think about when you were here and kind of the demographics of our student body, were we doing that? And you were part of this discussion, right? Are we really doing this? And how do we change? And a part of that has to do with recruitment, admission practices to a certain extent, but investments not only in financial aid, but into changing the way we operate. And I look at it from an identity perspective. I look at it from practices, being a more culturally proficient kind of campus, and then also kind of the programs. And do students see themselves in our faculty? Do the symbols and kind of and does the content and the curriculum reach them in a way that they feel like culturally affirmed? Are we thinking about cultural wealth versus the deficit language that is so dominant in discourse and education? So I know we can go deep on this piece, but all these things have to come into place. And we've done well. We're also in California, and demographics. I can't say that we just all of a sudden transformed it without there being demographics of California that made it a little bit easier. It would be hard if we were in another location, or harder. But yeah, we have more students who identify as Latinx than white students in our entering first year class, and that's been about 3 years in a row. And I expect that to be the case moving forward for several years. It's been an intentional effort to become a Hispanic serving institution. Like I said, there's like these legacy terms, but in terms of racially traditionally underrepresented students, those students are a majority on our campus.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely was not the case when I started. Terrific job by all. And it was interesting. It sounds like there was definitely, it was easier to get there, or the transition to getting there was easier because it was part of the mission of the college. And then you sort of helped the campus as a whole moved to make sure that everything else was there, because you can bring people there, but then if they don't feel supported, they're not going to stay, and they certainly will tell you that they're not.
Yeah, I mean, if your syllabus in a class, for, English is the easiest example. If it's all white male authors that you're reading their work, like, and the faculty member's perspective is such that those are the canons that they're using to teach, a composition class or whatever. Like, already, I mean, I'm a lot of these students experience that in other educational environments, but we've worked to really transform that environment. There are a couple of grants that we have applied for and received that focus on pedagogy in the classroom, making it more culturally relevant. Having culturally responsive curriculum is a really important piece. But representation also matters, and hiring practices and the things that we do. And we've done a lot of work in transforming our faculty. So in 2017, 17% faculty of color. Now we're at about 33%.
Wow.
In 2022. Still work to be done from a staff perspective. We're at 50% people of color. So, yeah, you got to create the environment. It's not just about bringing people in, and if they don't, feel at home or feel culturally affirmed, then we're not doing our job.
That's great. That's great. Well, I appreciate that. So one of the things I realized, I've been listening to our podcasts for years, but one question that I would probably want to hear more often, because the perspectives were so broad. So I went to dinner with a couple recently, and their daughter had transferred to Santa Cruz, and literally she spent one quarter on the campus. Her last quarter in college was on campus, and it was not a good experience. I mean, and I felt so badly, because she had worked so hard to find success in community college so she could end up at a UC, and then obviously everyone knows the circumstances changed drastically. But talk a little bit about CLU. During the time my niece was there, they had two huge things happen: Borderline Bar and Grill, the shootings there, and then COVID. How did the campus respond, and what are the lessons that you've learned from either or both?
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah, your niece's class had a series of things. I mean, obviously you point to some really traumatic experiences, but also we got to consider the fires.
Yes.
Impacted these areas. We evacuated our student body. We had the borderline shooting happened the night before the Woosley fire really kicked into high gear. So it's kind of like this double impact. It was brutal, and as a executive administrator on our campus, it was very taxing. But yeah, there were a lot of lessons learned. I mean, I would say that we leaned into who we are in terms of our mission of service, and tried to do that the best we can. From a psychological perspective, from a spiritual perspective, to be able to support students, to be able to support our faculty and our community of staff, et cetera. I realized probably one of the things I would not expect as much in an emergency as it came up through these experiences, is how critical communication is. Communicate about what's happened, and the kinds of words that one chooses to describe something that has happened, but how you talk about what's going to happen, and what the university is doing, and being responsive. And in the digital age and the social media age, things spin in so many different ways, and you have to kind of be on top of that, and be thoughtful about that. Certainly, there's operational stuff that we learned about in terms of how to manage evacuations, what's shelter in place versus having students leave. There's that kind of stuff. The issue with the shooting, that was something that impacted members of our community. We had over 30 students that were on site. We had one of the the people who passed in that shooting was a recent alum of Cal Lutheran, a really popular former water polo player here on campus. So, that was just devastating and relates to this issue that we're dealing with nationally on gun violence that has just become so polarizing. But, for us, trying to get a sense of community around those who are in pain, and we're also realizing that we need to invest more in psychological services. I think even before the pandemic and before these other things that came into play, that was an issue that was increasing, and all this stuff has just accelerated the emotional and psychological pain that people are in. Pandemic, I mean, I'm sure my story is similar to others that you've talked to about this. I mean, from an enrollment perspective, it's been painful. There's a lot of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Piece on this matters. It's amazing how a pandemic can be so political in terms of decisions about safety for the community, and students who say, "I'm not going to enroll if you make us wear a mask in class," and it's like, so there's a lot of stuff that ties to communication, ties to policies, and what's right. And like pre-pandemic, like there's so many things that I had no clue about that I feel like I'm a quasi expert on now, or like so anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about how to navigate kind of in the health, wellness, and safety area, and kind of calibrating our institution to meet the needs of students in ways that are different than what we did in the past in terms of whether it's the psychological piece, or being mindful about the conditions on campus that support people's medical needs.
Okay.
So that was kind of a mouthful, but it's been a crazy time with all of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Switch gears a little bit. Talk about new academic areas or pursuits for CLU students or faculty or staff that haven't been there before, but you show new promise or are coming.
Yeah, so I mentioned before a little bit about kind of our focus on music and entertainment industry. We're actually in the backyard of a lot of professionals who don't necessarily they live in Los Angeles but work in Los Angeles, or have studios out here, and you probably are familiar with this, and you're working in what you see. But we have lots of folks that have like really strong resumes that we can bring in as faculty members, or to do different kinds of lectures with students and stuff. And one thing I didn't mention that's probably important to talk about is the impact of professional sports on our campus. We're the training headquarters for the world champions Los Angeles Rams. They've been here for 5 years. We are now the inaugural training home for the Angel City Football Club, one of the most socially progressive and powerhouse female soccer clubs, women's soccer clubs on the planet.
Wow.
And they just started, and we have a great partnership with them in terms of the kinds of experiences, guaranteed internships with these organizations. We're pushing more into the sports management space and kind of all the different kinds of careers there, but have hands-on experiences like on our campus with professional organizations. So that's been very helpful. I've talked about the new science building. That's an area we need to continue to invest in. We are in a biotech corridor. Some of the biggest biotechnology companies in the world are in our backyard in Thousand Oaks and in the region. So we're trying to do more there. And engineering is a big one and a very popular area. And we've been talking a lot about like where we might go with engineering, particularly around technology and like computer engineering. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
And what about, I'm curious, because there was a discussion, I think, when we were there, because it's so popular and it's such a huge need, nursing.
Yeah, we've gone round and round on nursing and other allied health fields. We could potentially go into kind of the health management area. The big question for us is whether we go the clinical path. And there's a variety of things that we've talked about. We've talked about doctoral programs in physical therapy. We've talked about nursing, and other programs. And the investment in the clinical space is probably the biggest barrier, particularly in the pandemic, because it's a pretty significant investment to get into, to get all the lab spaces and all the practitioner spaces that are required for those programs. But we're talking about it.
Okay, great. So now we're going to turn the table again, and we're getting close to the end here. But so I was curious, you mentioned at the beginning your own application journey. Talk about where you went. And I was curious, I don't know if Wooey was there, and that was one of the things that drew you to Wyoming. But talk a little bit about that process, because I still find it fascinating that you from Thousand Oaks to the middle of the country.
Well, then going from Wyoming to Miami was probably even more. But yeah, it's kind of ironic that I'm in this field. I applied to one school, and I applied pretty late in the process. Like I was a good student, not an awesome student. I probably could have focused a little bit more. I was a social animal, I think, in high school. I enjoyed social stuff. But yeah, my college search was pretty minimal. And when my parents went to the University of Wyoming, and so that's the connection, right? So I had family on the region. My grandma was there. But I got in-state tuition as a child of an alum. So I even did better than Wooey. My tuition bill, my first semester of college was $826. So it was good value. It was a lot adjusting to, a rural kind of Rocky Mountain region. And then, but I had a good experience there, and it felt, to promote Wyoming a little bit, it's a land grant, R1 institution, the only 4-year institution in that state. But I got to know the governor on a first name basis. You get exposure to stuff that comes with being in a rural state, so I had a good experience there, and then went on to Miami for my master's and PhD.
Did it inform your perspective when you think about politics today? Sometimes, after the Roe v. Wade was overturned, sometimes I feel like we're living in like two different countries. Like, where are we?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Wyoming, I guess, a college or a college town tends to have a lot more openness to different strands of thinking and politics and ideologies and stuff. And that was certainly the case in Wyoming, but certainly, there were I would say Wyoming has a very libertarian kind of streak, and you see that with Liz Cheney.
Yes.
There's a lot of kind of independence like that. I remember recruiting for Wyoming, and going to a high school that had 2 graduating seniors, and then others that had like a dozen. And these were like ranch kids that lived really far away on their own. It was just kind of like let me be how I want to be, and that probably included their, don't take away my guns and some of that stuff. I mean, I learned and I got an appreciation for people's perspectives. And I think that's really important. And it's something that we're really struggling with today. We got a lot of confirmation bias that happens. And I think, getting people in a room together who have different views of things, it helps with understanding, and it helps explain where you're coming from to be able to talk about it with someone who feels very differently about it.
Yes. Agreed. Now we enter the lightning round. And I remember when I did this with Mark, he was surprised, I think, by my answers, as most people have been. So I'll be interested to hear your responses. So the first one, if you didn't have a job in higher education, what would you have liked to have done?
Well, there's the practical stuff. I was a poli-sci major. I was thinking about being a faculty member. There was law school and stuff like that. But if I really were to step out of, kind of that path that I was on and go to my heart, I think if I was in an education, I'd probably be in a creative endeavor. Some sort of artist, or I was talking to my wife the other day about like, what would it be cool, like to start a bonsai studio and get into some of that stuff.
Wow.
I love the combination of art and landscaping and that kind of thing. So that's kind of my jam. I also love to do ceramics, which I don't do enough of these days, but yeah, probably something in the creative space.
Great. Wow. That's fascinating. If you could live in another country, where would you live?
In another country, where would I live? Probably somewhere in Latin America. I did live in Mexico for a while. There's a few places in Mexico, but yeah, the quick answer to the question for me would be Mexico.
Okay. And what advice do you have for students, parents, and other counselors? Because probably a third of the people who listen to the podcast are professionals in college admissions and higher education about the process of applying.
My advice right now is going to be very contemporary. It's going to be very different than the don't stress about it or be planful. There's a lot of disruption, and paying attention to the current trends and being mindful that with test optional, with the pandemic, there are lots of things that are changing in admission and higher ed, and I think being a good investigator about what that looks like is really important, and talking to students and families who are kind of recently admitted to institutions, I think is critical right now to kind of see, what their experience has been. But I think that there's going to be a lot more merit money on the table for institutions that are middle achieving, my institution included, from a selectivity standpoint. And I think that there's probably, I know my colleagues are going to hate me for saying this, there's probably some opportunities at Reach schools that would not come up with the constraints of testing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we started to talk about this recently, but there's some fascinating things happening at really selective places among transfers. Kids with like one semester of A's, all of a sudden like, oh, you can go to blankety blank. So yeah, I think keeping an open mind, and I always imagine that as we work to educate students, hopefully we're helping them to think about tomorrow and certainly today, but tomorrow is so important because there's so many huge issues there.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I want to thank you for your time. This was terrific.
Okay, friends, on Thursday's episode, Dave is back, and we'll be talking about an article by Jay Matthews that appeared in the Washington Post fairly recently. The name of the article is High School Extracurriculars Are Nice, but College Extracurriculars Are Huge. Question from a listener. It's a question that comes in from Ellen from Massachusetts. And she wants to know, when colleges are looking at SAT and ACT scores, are they using the old numbers or are they using the new numbers? And are you really trying to tell me that there's some schools for whom a 32 ACT is not a score that a student should submit? So Lisa and I will be taking on that question. And we start a brand new interview. So this interview has a couple parts to it. The first part, and it's with John Bockenstedt, one of the really renowned giants in the admission world. He's the VP of enrollment at Oregon State after spending close to 20 years at DePaul in a long career that's exceeded 4 decades now. And in part one, John and I will just be talking about different admissions practices that are out there. And I'll be asking him, is this ethical or is it not ethical? And he gives his honest opinion on whether these practices that are very prevalent, whether they cross the line of impropriety or whether or not they are legit. So we hope you'll tune in Thursday for that episode. I close with some words of wisdom from Dr. Angela MacGyver when I interviewed her on the podcast. All right, last question. What's your advice for parents out there that are listening?
So I am a parent who is kind of at the end, right? I have a daughter in college, one who's going to college, and one who's in high school. And I don't know if this is pandemic related or just like wisdom with age, that I have let a lot of stuff go. I was intense about my children and their academics and their grades and their sports and their this, and I have let so much of it go. And I think it's healthy for everyone involved. And I know that that's the advice I would give.
That's good advice. Now, did you come to that knowledge post-pandemic or pre-pandemic?
It was post-pandemic, or it was during the pandemic and realizing what the pandemic was doing to my children. It was post-pandemic when my kids were applying to colleges and I had to, things just were put into a different perspective, right, for us and for me. And I think it's really been helpful in our family and our family dynamic and our children's mental health, step back a little bit.
Probably your mental health too.
My mental health too. My husband's not quite there. My son, he's like, he's still getting a C in Spanish. And I was like, whatever. He's going to be fine.
There you go. I love it. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.